Hello, fathers. I think a big part of being a father is obviously the marriage you have to your wife and the relationship you have in your life, whatever that is. Now, here's the deal. I don't pretend to be an expert on this, but I do have a successful relationship. But I would love to continue to learn more and more. I got fed a video on the old YouTubes that was how to predict a divorce with 91% accuracy. My parents were divorced, full disclosure, so I have a bit of experience with it. But I myself am, as far as I know, in nowhere close to that range. But I would love to watch this video. I haven't seen it. I'm going to watch along, offer my thoughts on it. I am not a professional, just a happily married man. So let's watch through this, see what's up.
There is a world-renowned marriage counselor named John Gottman, and John Gottman has been studying marriages his entire
I know John
life.
Gottman.
That's all he does.
He runs the Gottman Institute. John Gottman and the Gottman Institute, pretty famous. I actually haven't. I haven't read too much of their stuff, but my wife's read a few of their books, and things I've heard from it sound awesome. So let's listen.
That study marriages. There's a whole team of people that studies them, and he claims that he can predict whether or not a couple is going to get divorced with a 91% accuracy rate within the first 10 minutes of meeting them if they show the signs of fruitless fighting. Do you want to know what those signs are? It's scientifically proven that if you show all
I don't know what fruitless fighting is, but I'm excited to learn. I know in my life I've done a lot of fruitless fighting, but that's only just based off of my understanding of what fruitless is. I'm curious to see what he says here.
these signs, your marriage is in trouble. Well, the first sign is what we call harsh startup. Harsh startup means we need to talk. The harsh startup is you did it again. The harsh startup is beginning the conversation already abruptly, already negatively, and already with a hostile attitude. Well, the next sign.
Yeah, I would agree. That's a shitty way to do it. I think even if you're mad, starting it up with "we got to talk" doesn't set anyone up for success. It immediately puts it on the someone on the defensive. And I think what's interesting about that too is if you start in with a preconceived notion of how it all went, it doesn't leave you room for being incorrect. So if you start by saying, we got to do this or we got to talk, I'm already mad, then you might actually be mad about something that you have the wrong perception of, even if you think you got the right one. Whereas if you go in with like questioning, like, hey, help me out here. I'm trying to figure this out. Like, what happened here? And you could still be right with what you thought and then be kind of mad about that. But if you go in with that open mind, it's works way better. All right, let's see what he says.
Actually, four things. Gottman calls it the four horsemen. It's defensiveness, contempt, which we've already talked about, criticism, and stonewalling. Those are the
Four horsemen: defensiveness, contempt, criticism, and stonewalling. Admittedly, all of these things are hard to avoid at all times, but 100,000,000,000% worth it. Defensiveness usually is born from your own, in my experience, from my own insecurity around something. So if I'm feeling insecure or shitty around something, I'm usually defensive. So, and it never ends up panning out well if I'm going into something defensive. Contempt, that to me means if you're carrying something with you from thing to thing, it means you haven't settled it from the first time. I'd rather personally have a long, drawn out thing that eventually ends in a resolution and apologies and an understanding, even if you don't agree, but an understanding, rather than carry contempt. And I think that that's part of being honest, is having conversations when things happen, however small, however big, but appropriate conversations to resolve conflict. Criticism, I think criticism's a pretty shitty thing because it's oftentimes you're criticizing something that you don't agree with. And most of the time that's not really useful for the general situation. Criticism is different than questioning and being genuinely curious and maybe disagreeing with it. but openly criticizing never makes someone feel good, especially if it's about, a way of being that they are. That being said, my wife and I differ on many things that, like, I would just not do it the same way she does it. But to criticize it does neither of us good. Stonewalling. I'm gonna have to you Google that one. Stonewalling. Stonewalling definition: delay or block. And then stonewalling is delaying or blocking or giving evasive answers, things that are not asking the question. I mean, all four of these things are just failures in communication, and they're not how you should go about it. So I could see why this would lead to divorce.
Four horsemen that together make up the next sign of divorce. Now, what is stonewalling? Stonewalling, which is when one person in the couple is just not responding. Stonewalling is, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
sure. Maybe looking out the window, you're having a conversation, but they're not looking at you. They're not really telling you how they feel. You don't really know what's going on inside of them. Appears like that person doesn't even care. The next sign is very much related to the previous four. It's called flooding. Flooding is when you have so many feelings that you can't even speak them. So they're so flooded with feelings, they can't tell you how they feel. It's not that they don't have a feeling, they've got so many. They can't pick one. And flooding is very dangerous because it leads to the next sign. The next sign is physiological distress.
Yeah, so flooding is actually, I think we all flood at different levels. I think some of us have a much higher threshold before we flood, but if you get so exasperated with poor communication, harsh startup, defensiveness, all the other stuff, that you get to the point where flooding's happening, you have so many emotions. And I think some people go here sooner than others, but you have so many emotions that you can't communicate. You're done. Like there's no way to have meaningful discourse at that point in time. I actually have a bit of a close relative who I feel hits this emotional threshold to where they do exactly this, the flooding, where it's like they're so overstimulated that they just become just not a wall necessarily, but just like a crazy person. And I mean, I've got there at points in my life, arguments that just get so blown up that I end up in this place of like, like there's just too much emotion that anything that's coming out is just inappropriate and over the top. So yeah, flooding's a rough one. Physiological distress, yeah, and that's the next one. But yeah, physiological distress due to the buildup of all this stuff. This all seems like it's boiling down to just communication to me. It's here.
If you've been allowing the conflict in your marriage to go on for so long, the anger to not get resolved for so long, you're going to start having physical problems. You're going to start having ulcers, backaches, neck aches. You're going to start drinking more. You're going to start having physiological problems. You're going to start failing from the inside. The last two signs of marriages that are in distress,
I can't speak to that medically, but seems to make sense to me.
And failed repair attempts. What does bad memories mean? What it means is you interpret history negatively. You're only remembering the negative things from the past. It's like, yeah, I remember our wedding. Yeah, he was late. He was late to that. He's still late today. You forget all the good things and you remember all the bad things.
Yeah, that's just fucking dumb in general. Stop that shit.
Negatively. Bad memories.
Go back, look at photos.
To bad things in your relationship.
Find the positive times. I mean, I find for me, like, maybe I'm lucky in this, but when I look back on stuff, in my life, I have many bad memories that I look back on, bad business relationships, bad things that fell through. But in my relationship, we had plenty of rough times, but I couldn't for the life of me recall what those would be specifically. I mean, I'm sure if I found myself in an argument that related to one of those bad times, it would like come up as like something that but I think part of that is that I've fought over, but I think part of that is like I've resolved these with my wife, with myself and my wife, took my part in it, owned my part in it, understood my part in it while simultaneously having this conversation. Um, the communication seemed to be the biggest
The last
thing for
thing,
me.
failed repair attempts. This is really critical. Everybody fights. Even good marriages fight. Fighting in a marriage is not a problem. The problem is, what are you going to do about it? And the really critical thing is to be able to repair what you did. Fighting isn't a problem. Not being able to repair it is. And repair attempts can be simple. It can be as simple as coming to a common understanding. It can be as simple as communicating that you're on the same side. But you've got to have the ability to get back on the beam. You've got to have the ability to get back on track again. You've got to have the ability to repair. Most marriages never really solve their problem.
So, failed repair attempts. Yeah, I mean, that next line of most marriages never really solve the problem. It's not necessarily about solving problems. It's about, in my experience at least, it's been about learning to say I'm sorry, learning when there's a genuine, there's a genuine two-way split on the responsibility of what's gone down, which is a very real thing in my opinion. Maybe it's not always 50-50. Maybe it's a 70-10 or something. 70-10, that was bad math. 70-30 sort of deal. But learning to come back and say I'm sorry and mean it. Like, I'm really sorry for this. And the best part about my marriage and this is, like, when I said I'm sorry, my wife would immediately drop her act too, drop her pretenses of being really angry and say she's sorry too. And that was really powerful for me because, like, so much of the shit we argue about, and especially at the beginning of our marriage, it really didn't matter. Like, even if I thought it mattered, it really didn't matter. It was about dumb stuff like, you never wear lingerie for me or something like that. I don't know if that was actually an argument, but it would be as trivial as that, where it's like, you know, a perspective that I want or would like, but doesn't happen as often, and there's some weird frustration around that. So these all boil down to communication, which I believe is one of the tenets of why I'm not divorced. Communication.
Yeah, I know. That's sad news, but it's true. Gottman has discovered this. But you will spend most of your marriage fighting about the same issues over and over and over again. You're never going to see child rearing the same way. You're never going to see your in-laws the same way. You're never going to manage money the same way. You're never going to do lots of things the same way. You'll come to a common enough agreement to live with the difference between the two of you. But for most things that you fight about, you never do come to a common understanding of them.
Yeah.
So why do people fight?
I
You
tend to
fight because
come
you
to a
don't
common
feel connected.
understanding.
You feel disconnected, and you're fighting to be reconnected. You think you're fighting about money. You think you're fighting about her parents, but you're not. You're fighting because I need to feel connected to you when I don't. And if you
Valid.
feel reconnected to each other, then the subject that you're fighting about doesn't become as important.
I think that's sometimes the case. I don't think that's always the case. I think there's times where you fight because, I mean, depending on who you are, it could be over trivial things, or it could be over something that, like, you genuinely have strong feelings about that are unrelated to connection. Like, I've always felt very connected to my wife, but we definitely do have fights around connection where, like, I will be lacking some connection and need it and pick a fight about some other dumb shit. And clearly this is a very real thing. But to say that you're never really fighting about the thing you're fighting about is not true. I think you definitely do have times where you genuinely fight about some stuff.
The thing is never the thing. And what I mean by that,
It's not never the thing.
you think you're fighting about something, you're not. You're fighting about whether or not.
But it's very
feel
often
connected. And
true
once you do feel connected,
that
the thing all of a
when you're
sudden
more connected,
doesn't seem so important.
fights are less likely to happen. I think that's the important piece, is like when you are more connected and you are more engaged with each other, that means getting off of these dumb fucking things. Sorry, it came out. Then you tend to be far less likely to fight. And when the fights are a lot more mellow. So I'll agree with that. Yeah, cool. Anyway, first time I try that. Got fed to me. Seemed like a great video, actually. I agree with fundamentally all of it. And if you're noticing those signs in your relationship, it's time to address some shit, yo. Thanks for coming along. If you enjoy this, please share it with someone who you think needs to hear it. And to all those fathers out there, stay strong. You're in it. Hell yeah. You're worthy. Get after it.